Live on Building in Public, and today we've got Roy and Minn. Hi, Roy. Hi, Minn.
Hello, thank
Hello.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I was asking around. I was catching up with Katie Stanton the other day, and she was like, "Oh, you know who you should have on this is Roy and Minn." She's like, "Do you know them?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I haven't seen them in so long.
That's
This would be a good time to catch up."
awesome. Every time I talk to her, I'm like, well, she may be doing this for fewer years than I have, but man, she is so good at it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I should be a good investor like Katie Stanton, you know?
She really launched into it full force. It's really amazing to see what she's accomplished already in such a short time period.
Totally.
So, I think there's like we were saying, there's so many different topics we could address because I think, you guys have interesting tech circles and ideas around the future that we'd love to learn about. We spend a lot of time with James, actually. James comes on all the time too. So we have some of your...
95% of my ideas are just repackaged James ideas. So it goes. You can like do a little hand signal whenever it's like, that's a James.
So we'll we can sort of talk about any of that stuff. But, one of the topics I think that you guys had outlined some of the things about are this web show that you guys have run for a while now called This Is Not Advice. And, I'd love to sort of take it back to like, not only how did that begin, but how do you guys think about yourselves as creators online? And, this sort of comes from, lineage. You guys have kind of the Bloomberg, which is itself a media creation organization. You have like the Bloomberg, kind of ecosystem around you. And you have, I've been fortunate to be a part of a bunch of different, kind of private stuff that you guys have hosted. And it feels like it's really part of your DNA. So I wonder sort of if you can take us through how you guys think about that in general, and then sort of how, the specifics of This Is Not Advice came to be. And then you're sort of, I think we'll have tons of interesting discussions and questions to chat about sort of what you're learning with that.
Yeah, I'll do my take on it, and then Minn, just because chronologically it started earlier, and then Minn, whatever you got. So first thing just about Bloomberg is interesting, just a different perspective on Bloomberg, which is Bloomberg is in the main a financial data and communications company. That is the vast majority of the people, profit, activities, all kinds of stuff. And media is, in some places, including in tech, the most visible part of the company. But Bloomberg has sort of multiple different pieces. And I think that our desire to create, so first of all, I don't know that I like self-identified as a creator until everybody started saying creator economy. And I'm like, all right, fine. Sure. We make things too. And I've been writing for a long time as a way to just clarify my thoughts. And, you're a VC, you sell a commodity product called money, and you differentiate yourself by what you can offer to people and by whether they know about you. And so writing also helps with that, but it's never really for me been the primary reason for doing it. The primary reason is like figure out what I think about things and also don't repeat myself. And then what I realized is I get all these questions about like work dilemmas from people, and I wish I had someplace to send them. Like as a parent, I don't know, you're not a parent, David, are you? No. As a parent, there's this book, What to Expect When You're Expecting.
Oh yeah, I've heard of it.
Just like a reference guide to having a kid. It's like month 1, month 2, and there's nothing like that for work. And work is at least as common an experience as having a child. And so I'd had this idea in the back of my head of like doing like Dear Abby for work kind of thing for a while, and procrastination. Then the pandemic hits, we're at home. It's like, you know what, we should try something new. And so I just started on my phone recording these like daily short things. And then we just realized that while that was fine for a janky V1, that if we wanted to like actually make it useful, we had to up our level of attention on it. And so I think that the next step was inviting Minn to do it jointly, gradually upgrading things like our streaming software and camera setup and all that. But the real trick is it's just a pretext. And what it's a pretext for is we're transcribing every episode in the background and then editing them into basically a compendium of perspectives on different work questions of everything from like how to manage to how to change jobs to like what to do with different ethical dilemmas at work. It has a bit of a startup. It has more than a bit. It has a significant startup orientation just because that's the occupation that we practice, but it's intended to be for any one of your classmates from school who has a job working in an information kind of industry. It's probably less applicable if you're a plumber, but maybe some stuff is applicable there too. I don't know. So that was kind of my journey with it. And I'm constantly messing around with making stuff, side project ideas for games and all kinds of things. But that's me. Minn, I feel like had her own podcast long before. So Minn has her own history on this.
Oh, great.
Yeah, content creation is so interesting. I feel like for a long time, I don't know, I started blogging on the internet, 15 years ago, probably. Think about every major blogging platform, like Blogger, Blogspot, Zanga,
LiveJournal,
or I wasn't on LiveJournal.
Zanga, but you got the two EPUBs.
The Zanga, and then there were like a host of these like social networking kind of public posting type platforms, MySpace and Twitter being kind of canonical examples. But anyway, I always loved messing around and kind of trying to establish, mostly as a way to find friends online, right? Find other people that might not have been in your geographic vicinity, but who you could connect with based on the content that you're producing. And then, a couple of years ago when audio started to become much more popular and frankly much easier to produce, and you didn't need all the fancy equipment necessarily just to get started, my friend and I started messing around and building a podcast together about the influence of technology on culture, right? And then with This Is Not Advice, it did start out with Roy, wanting to share all of his hard-earned wisdom from being a founder and an executive and an investor. And I had never really I'm actually quite camera shy. And so the idea of bringing your whole self onto the internet, beyond beyond the words that you write, beyond your voice, video is quite intimate in some ways. And so this was partially, I think, a personal challenge for me. And then it's been kind of cool to watch how do you create content in a way that is unique based on the medium in some ways, right? What we produce on This Is Not Advice, which is intended to be short form, snappy, kind of get the value within 30, 45 seconds, is different than asking somebody to read a 10 to 20 minute long form piece of content that you've spent probably weeks, if not months, thinking about, writing, drafting, proofreading, editing, and playing around with those things has also been really fun.
Right. And so the video stuff, you're talking about sort of the intimacy of it and how you're trying to create kind of the punchy moment. So do you have a pretty involved editing process to get through that?
No. Well, no, we do a decent amount of prep work, pre-work. Because when we started, it was Roy and me. It was Roy, and then I joined, and then we kind of started. We actually worked with some collaborators, a social media expert, basically, who had worked a lot with creating short form vital content. And so we would loosely script what we wanted to say and kind of the arc of what we should talk about within a 5 to 7 minute span, right? And then for now, we haven't played around with post editing as much, other than just making it look a little more professional and shareable. But yeah, because I know Highlighter, that's a big part of what you do. You record a long form piece of content and then find the best 2 minute highlights.
Yeah, I mean, we would love to know how to use editing better, but we've tried editing it down, and it's how much value do you really get out of editing 5 minutes down to 45 seconds? We found not that much. I mean, some, but not that much. And now we have a whole team, I guess I should also just say, of there are 4 other people on the Bloomberg beta team who play one role or another in sort of passing the baton of work of This Is Not Advice around, from booking a guest to determining the editorial calendar to like showing up when the guest shows up and making sure that they have all their questions answered. And it's taken some figuring, but that's been organizationally also, and somebody who leads all the effort. And because if I lead it, it's problematic. And Minn didn't want to lead it. So there we go. And I think that for us, for me, it feels like a bet on discovering lots of useful moments. And on the one hand, I have this feeling of like, well, it's just good to do regardless of how many people watch it. And yeah, viewership steadily grown. And, when Amjad comes on, it gets real big for a week, kind of thing. And on the other hand, part of me is like, have we figured it out yet? Or is there something like, is there another turn of the wheel that we have yet to figure out? And so that kind of like chin stroking of how we bet on what we would like it to be, because like ideally it should be a first port of call for anybody who struggles with some dilemma about work. But now it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to go to Twitter and type in like hashtag this is not advice and some random word? Like that's not usable. And so maybe having a searchable reference will help. I don't know. There's a bunch of pieces of it that might be the difference makers, but they might not. And so struggling with that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Sounds so similar to what we're going through.
Yeah. I mean, just literally like talking as a team every so often. So now we're on a monthly cadence of like, what did we bet on? What worked? What didn't? How do we assess it? And sort of just science experiment on yourself. And would love, because you guys are going on this parallel journey and also you're talking to others who are doing it. If you have insights, like the most useful kind of insight to me is a hypothesis to try. You should try X, and then we'll stack rank it somewhere in the hypotheses of things we can try. Second most useful insight is a framework for how to assess if something's working. Like, is it great that, I don't know, I'm making up the number, 1,500 people a day, roughly watch This Is Not Advice, or is that terrible because the world's big? Like, I can't figure it out,
I'm actually super intrigued by so much of what you said, because I didn't realize how much kind of we are kindred spirits in these efforts. So you're actually transcribing these things, and you mean for them to exist long term. So they're not meant to be the hit of the day. Or
the liveness of it is a pretext.
Means of creation.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what Minn said. Yes, we like evergreen questions for that reason. We do some that are more like of the moment when it feels really urgent, but we like evergreen questions, and it is a way to, like, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, kind of, gradually step our way towards something big.
Right. And do you think about, you mentioned like there's the viewership numbers or the goals, but would you be like, do you feel like you have an intuition of what you want a goal to feel like would you be like, if you met a great founder working on a new thing that you'd never heard of, would that be
anecdotes that would be wonderful? Like, an anecdote that would be wonderful is a founder saying, hey, I learned about you guys through This Is Not Advice and worked with you. Or a talent being hired by one of our companies saying to the founder, I learned about your company because of this thing called This Is Not Advice. Or somebody just saying to us, and this has happened to me before, saying, years ago I was stuck in this place and I wasn't sure what to do, and that totally helped me, and I remain grateful for that. I forgot about you guys, but now that I'm meeting you in real life, it's great. Or just provide the service, but provide the service meaning just have that effect without hearing about it. That's good too. But
I'm wondering,
just the core hypothesis is we all suffer at work more than we should, and fail is such a strong word, and could take advantage of more opportunities to thrive if only the practical know-how about how to do it were more easily available.
Right. And so given that it has this like evergreen nature to it, like that you particularly design content to be that, do you have a way right now, like, where it lives on a blog or something, or where you have kind of the curation of all the...
At the moment, it lives on a Git book, which is sitting in the background. And the idea is to make it something that's community editable, because, we don't want it to be our ideas about how to work.
Right.
We want it to be the best ideas about how to work. And so we're trying to figure out, is that the right format in which to release it? Should we be using some other platform? I like Gitbook because Git feels like a stable enough basis for collaboration. and also familiar to a lot of the kinds of people we like working with. But, the editing tool is kind of slow, and like every time you type a keystroke, you wait like a little too long, so it's a little gummy. So it's not perfect, but that's what we're trying to figure out. The other thing is that it is text with links out, like Wikipedia, as opposed to, it is not like Encarta. We're not like embedding videos for that moment, in part because the video is useful for some things, but I don't know that it's actually the most efficient mechanism for delivery of the content. So those are some of the questions. I don't know.
And when you say it might not be the right mechanism for the delivery of content, meaning you might want to create via video, but somebody might want to consume via the transcript?
Correct. That's what I mean. Yeah, because video is hard to scan. It's not structured. It's not very precise, but it's very
searchable.
Yeah, it's not searchable, but it's very fast to create, and it communicates tone, which of course writing can do, but and we run right toward charged topics. I mean, how should I talk about politics at work? And, hey, I've given to Black Lives Matter. Have I done enough? Like we like run at the hardest stuff. And so video is very useful for the authentic communication of nuance in a way that text is possible, but it's just much more time consuming to do.
Do you track much about the kind of any metrics around which kind of content tends to, I don't know, maybe get the most reach or has the most sort of anecdotal inbound?
Yeah, we've done some of it. I mean, I think that actually, man, I'd be curious because I feel like my perspectives are biased. So how do you think about what we track and know?
I mean, I think, the videos themselves, we track like loosely, what are the kind of views that we get within, call it the first 24 hours, because they do go like live on a particular day. And so there's usually like a little bump. And then we do plan out what are the kind of broader topics and areas that we want to be able to hit on that do align with what our hypotheses are about who the audience is, right? And so if we want to target would-be founders, someone who is thinking about starting something new, what are all the kinds of tactical questions that would-be founder might have, and then how do we figure out what are the specific yet generalizable questions that she might have, so that we can answer them and find potential collaborators that we can work with to answer them in as like thorough as possible, right? So like loosely, that's kind of all the planning that we do. I think we're still figuring out what are the right ways for us to engineer that sort of like virality, frankly. And that's been like an interesting exercise and a constant iteration process.
I have one kind of, I don't know, hypothesis or proposal to sort of, just out of my own curiosity is, have you thought about the process of, say, taking, I don't know, creating like a branded, newsletter, maybe it's called the This Is Not Advice newsletter. And maybe every time you create one of these, it shows up in a newsletter format that's then like searchable in an inbox, and maybe you have some of the transcript available there. And then you sort of have like, effectively like a newsletter is like a delivery mechanism for a thing that's backed by a blog, and presumably, people could discover your stuff through that. Is that?
Yes. So we've thought about it, and the intent is once we're ready to start directing people basically to the Gitbook or the blog to do that. And then the questions we're trying to figure out and open input on any of this is that a daily thing with each day, or is it a weekly recap with, kind of summaries? Like, what's the right cadence and content for something that is interruptive? And my current hypothesis on it is themes are probably better. And, we can group content across themes. Like we've seen, a bunch of the startup stuff takes off because it might be our community. Also, by the way, there's like little things in what works that we've noticed, like questions with I in them work better than questions with you in them. Right. But that's our current hypothesis, is like to do theme roundups, like 5 questions on managing and 5 questions on whatever kind of thing. It may or may not be the right thing to do, and totally open to alternatives.
And do you find that you're generating those questions mostly yourself or mostly crowdsourced, or like a nice mix?
In the beginning, it was almost entirely ourselves. And ourselves is a bit of a weird thing because it was like, well, what question did one of us get asked in the last 2 days that seems interesting to talk about? So there were questions asked of us informally where we'd then say to the person, are you okay if we do this on This Is Not Advice? We may or may not name you based on what you want. And what we thought would work, which has not worked at all, is people just chiming in on Twitter and being like, you should tackle this. Who knows, too high bar or something like that. But now we have a lot of guests who want to come on, or we invite them on. By the way, you'd be welcome to come on if you wanted to come on. And basically it works like this, which is we talk to somebody and we say, we'd love to have you on as a guest. Is there something you are passionate about talking about? And then based on what they bring up, we find a way to say, like, either we tackled that one already, but here's another nuance on it, or here's an open area. But there's so many dilemmas to handle about work that my guess is even for a good V1, we're probably only 50, after a year of doing it, 180 episodes today. We're probably, 40, 60% of the way there on like a good V1. And so we both launch without a good V1, which is, I'm good with.
Get going,
And the thing that I think we've come to really appreciate, or at least certainly I have come to really appreciate about this journey of content creation for us is like consistency matters a lot. And so even, and I think content creators have written about this or talked about this at length, but just this, like we have a pretty rigorous cadence, right? We were doing it every day. And then we finally, at some point, several months into it, decided, okay, we should take like Fridays off for our mental sanity. But just like coming on every day. And even if it's just like, even if the content itself is only 5 to 7 minutes, that's still like an hour's worth of work, bookended, right? Preparing for it and then post, like making sure the transcript gets transcribed and all of that. And so it's non-trivial work. And so I've certainly come to greatly appreciate the value of consistency when it comes to content.
Yeah. I think we noticed a big change too in, we used to run these kind of video sessions on Zoom maybe a year ago, and they had a lot of energy, but it was a heavy lift where we would have to like script it and have pre-calls and have a roadmap. And it's like a lot of work. So we'd end up only doing one every week or two. And then when we kind of started doing it this way, we have kind of continually lightened our own expectation and the expectation that we prep guests with, which has made it much easier. Like we spend an hour on air with each, session, and we do basically 2 a day. So we do, 2 a day, 5 days a week. But the lift is so light that we're really, we're really only spending that time. We have some help with scheduling, and we have Mishti spends a lot more time after the fact because the tooling isn't fully built to do kind of the highlight creation. But we've sort of moved from a very heavy process to a very light process where even like the topics we're going to discuss, we sometimes talk about just kind of on air. So the consistency definitely that you mentioned, we feel that and experience that too. And I think the more that we can make the process of creation lighter weight, the easier it is. Like, let's discuss the topics on air because it doesn't really matter. We're not expecting people to sit through and watch the whole video. We're going to expect to create
I think that's been...
Go ahead, Mishti.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I think that's been really a game-changing thing because Roy mentioned just like the authenticity of video. I think leaning into just having things more unscripted and just like being comfortable even with like a little bit of silent time on air, if people are reading something together or whatever, the expectation that like no one's really going to watch these hour or 2 long streams that we do. They'll just watch the highlights that we clip out. I think has put a lot less pressure on people when they come on and like brought out way more authentic sides of them when we're asking them about stories and stuff. So I think that's kind of the power of the highlight creation, is that it in some sense changes the whole dynamic of the like show as people think of it. And it also kind of mimics how people learn in real life. Yeah. Sorry for that.
No problem. I think we may have had a little internet glitch. Oh, okay.
My internet. But yeah, that's all I was saying, kind of about the clipping as a means to actually like changing the entire on-air dynamic has been surprising in a good way.
Totally. I mean, if writing is editing, then making video must be clipping or something like that. I've been surprised, you just brought up the tooling, at how inconsistent some of the tooling is. Like, I'll give you an example. We want to have a thumbnail that is just a designed image, and we literally can't figure out how to do it. Like, we have one now, but it just plays as an overlay on the video for the first 10 seconds. And so like, I'm still not sure if on Twitter people see the thumbnail mostly or not, because sometimes Twitter auto plays videos and sometimes it doesn't. And if you don't, it's just been, some platforms you can change the thumbnail after the fact and some you can't. And so there's just, and then, things have slight nuances. Like we start out on Periscope, but Periscope doesn't exist anymore, but the Periscope links still exist. So it's all this, I think a big part of, I think this is one of the themes actually of being a great internet creator is having incredible attention to the fine points of all the platform nuances and tracking them as they change, but also seeing when a minor shift in one of them. Like I remember I was on the board of Flickster. One of the things Flickster was incredible at was like Facebook would tweak something and they'd be like, bam, we have a whole new product that just capitalizes on that tweak and explodes. And so I think that is part of being a good internet creator, is that command over the fine details of how the tooling works.
And on the flip side, sorry, go ahead, David. Again.
No, please.
On the flip side, and this segues a little bit to one of your earlier questions, which is like, what do Roy and I, like our day jobs as investors, like what are the things that we get excited about? And just even in this process, because we've observed and experienced firsthand some of the glitches and pain points, I love this idea of like, how do you take a process and create something that makes that process infinitely easier, right? And I think like video creation was like a huge one with the likes of like Instagram and TikTok, and like it started in social, right, to help and Vine probably being a predecessor to that. And like audio content is like way easier to create than ever before. Same thing with transcribing that audio content. Yep. And there are these finer points that Roy is pointing to, which is like, like snipping together, overlaying music on top of your video content, creating highlight reels, and then adding text over it, like overlays onto it. Some of that you can do in like consumer social apps, which is kind of amazing today. But some of it is, especially if you want to do like multiplayer versions and make it collaborative, Karen, our partner in New York, thanks to her work, we have the privilege of working with this amazing founder that's building kind of a collaborative video app called Capsule, if anybody wants to look at it. It's not an advert, I'm just really excited. But like that's, I think, a consistent theme around, how do you make the means of creation, like the process, into a product that makes it really easy for the end user?
I'm looking for your shout out. Was it Capsule, CAPSULE?
Yeah, Capsule Video.
Capsule.video, is it?
Yeah. And so I feel like you're doing that with Highlighter too, right? Like how do you create long form video that's like this new version of like a TV show, but like on the internet, and make that really seamless and easy, because you can now basically turn your room into a broadcast studio.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think the context for how you create, definitely shapes the creative output product a lot. So I'm curious, the context of what we're doing here, we're sort of all gathering in our, minds and ideas, and faces are sort of bouncing off each other and helping us figure out which way this goes. Whereas it sounds like some of the original, this is not advice, was Roy on a phone taking his own videos. And I wonder, like, that almost feels to me like a little bit of the TikTok inspired kind of single creator thing. So
maybe without the energy of that, but I mean, we did talk about like what platform to be on, like was TikTok the right place or Instagram Live? And, I think all things being equal, Twitter was most important to us because it's where kind of the community of productivity junkies mainly lives. LinkedIn, second most important, even though it looks so ugly. A lot of people are just on there and their notifications are so interruptive that people see it. They just prioritize live in their notifications. Definitely annoyed people. We had a founder in our portfolio be like, Roy, I'm tired, like literally like not subtweet me because she called me out, publicly shame me for the free. And, you do little things like edit the LinkedIn notification text for what appears in your mini notification, that kind of thing. But, we thought about Twitch. We thought about, once Clubhouse started, we thought about Clubhouse, and we would do Instagram, but for the fact that Instagram doesn't cross-populate with the other ecosystems as easily. So you can publish video, record once, publish many to LinkedIn and Twitter, but you can't do it with Instagram. And then, TikTok I just didn't feel as personally familiar with it, but maybe the answer is TikTok. And also our audience that we want to reach is a much wider demographic range than who uses TikTok. So I don't know, but yeah, it does change everything. And part of the reason to have Minn on is I just think conversation is a better way to learn than a single person spouting their view.
Yeah. Yes, I think Minn told us before, she was calling it like you've got this kind of foil dynamic where you bounce off of each other and help. That's sort of what emerges.
Is that foil dynamic does work really well. And I mean, like all these things, you're opportunistic. Like Minn happened to say, like, hey, I'm looking for more opportunities to stretch and try some things in public that may feel uncomfortable. And I was like, great, we have a need here and let's do it. And then it turned out, from my perspective at least, that Minn and my just like vibe of doing it worked really well. And then Minn was like, I'd like to do it, so this often and not that often. And, so we just kept tweaking as we went.
Right. How do you think about, so you mentioned that I think it's more recently that you've started to bring kind of guests on in a more regular cadence. That's kind of a newer thing. And how do you think about a guest with kind of effectively two interviewers? How do you manage that?
We've tried it, and honestly, I think Minn can speak for herself, but I think I like it when it's three of us. I think it works fine. But again, that's a common talk show dynamic, right? But Minn, I don't know. You want to speak to how often you want to show up? But Minn's got standing invite to be there every day.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is also the constraints of the timing of the medium, right? Mm-hmm. Like we do want these to be bite-sized. I think one of our viewers once shared with Roy that he enjoys This Is Not Advice episodes like with his morning coffee. And so, it's like 5 to 10 minutes in the morning or at the end of your day. And I think part of it is that the dynamic of having 2-on-1 when it's meant to be short, it's harder to like get into it and get out of it very quickly, especially because we do want to offer enough airtime for the guest who wants to share his or her perspective. So part of it's that, but I'll like happily join every so often. And then the other dynamic is that we did borrow this from existing creators who have, I think, done this really well, which is inviting guests is one of the surefire best ways to expand your audience and reach, right? It's a way to meld both of your audiences together. Mm-hmm. And so because we are primarily distributing through Twitter, we've invited a lot of guests who I think have like formidable audiences of their own on Twitter, especially ones that may not always be like the most overlapping, which I think is even better in some ways. And that's given us an opportunity to stretch in terms of like who we want to talk to. Mm-hmm. And we want to
I mean, I have to say in terms of like our guest portfolio, because we do think of it that way, like it's a mix of people we just like who are friends who we want to talk to, people who have big followings who we're getting to know. We keep an eye toward diversity, because we really want the group of guests to reflect the full range of perspectives that we want to inform how work ought to function. And if you only go for people who are already visibly successful, you curtail yourself on some of those other dimensions. And my wife has this thing she says that I often repeat, which is that you should have a mentor at every decade of their life. So like I'm 45. She thinks I should have a mentor in their 20s, a mentor in their 30s, a mentor in their 40s, et cetera, et cetera. And there's something about that of like the perspective of somebody who's sharp and thinking about these things, who has fewer years of work experience, might be more valuable than somebody who has decades and has forgotten what it was like to mess with the settings in Zoom. I don't know, any of us has forgotten that, but something.
Right. Misty, I think you had mentioned, I think you had some ideas that you wanted to explore.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love that advice on mentorship. Like, I would love to, if you guys asked, or to see a series where you ask people like in later stages of their career who their like younger mentors are, because no one thinks of it in that way, but that makes a lot of sense and would be super interesting. But what I was saying earlier is that this is just sort of like a mind-blowing conversation for me, because I feel like DK and I last summer when we started doing these Zoom town halls, we had like literally exactly the same issues, which is why we started building all of this video stuff. It was like everything felt too scripted. It was a pain to invite guests. We had to like manually hire someone to make thumbnails for us. Like the video streaming after the fact. Like we couldn't control the cameras, so we had this video editor doing expensive like manipulation of the Zoom boxes to make this asset, and then where would we share it and all of this stuff. And so something that's like so organic to produce, which is just like a video conversation like we're having, just became like such an immense pain to actually disseminate and loop people into, which is what honestly the best part has been of sharing these highlights, is when we can tag people in on Twitter afterwards. And so the magic of the moment like lives on throughout time instead of being this like ephemeral thing. So I don't know, I feel like we could share some of the things that we're thinking about.
Yeah, please. I mean, would love to
highlights and stuff.
Well, let me ask you guys, for you guys, when you think about the goal, like if our short-term goal is like do a good job and keep people's attention, but our long-term goal is build a useful repository of wisdom about work, how do you think about your goals for doing this? Because, by the way, I think goal discovery is also something that happened to us. Like everybody likes to think, like, start out with a goal. I don't know. Sometimes I find I figure out what my goal is by doing a thing. And I'm curious how you think about what your goals are.
Yeah, we also kind of started out without too much of a goal. We were just like, let's start reading Twitter together every day and just see what happens, and like invite people to come join us when it's interesting. And then we started finding out that there's so many nuggets of like amazing wisdom and like discovery would come up live. And now we're in a similar situation where we're like, wow, we have all these threads on Twitter, but how does anyone find them when they're relevant, and how should we like bundle them and disseminate them and things like that. But I think like DK once used the term like TikTok for the world's information or something. Like if you could get short form video clips with transcripts searchable across different topics, it's really like almost a new way of searching information that was previously like either hidden in people's heads or in this inscrutable, like unscannable medium online.
And by the way, I think our conversation now is an example of how big a challenge that information discovery is. And, just like we're friends who vaguely knew we were working on things that rhymed, but had yet to discover how much they were running on almost exactly the same rails with almost exactly the same problems. And so that to me is like, it's such a head scratcher about how do you close those loops. And, it's not a problem that search is solving for us. Like, if you search, it's a problem that Wikipedia has solved for certain areas of knowledge, I feel like. But if I search like how to fire someone or almost any how-to category, I just get bombed with lots of how-tos that are vaguely overlapping. There's not a meta one that rules them all, that kind of thing. And so we're just trying to tackle that in our little corner of the things in the universe that we care about, which is, just the thing you do with more of your waking hours than anything else working.
Yeah, and I think that the idea of Wikipedia, I think, is inspiring to us too, because Wikipedia is kind of like this neutral point of view, canonical world knowledge, and a lot of the stuff you're talking about, like how-tos, or the kinds of conversations we have, are a little bit free-flowing, and we're trying to like explore and discover new knowledge by way of just like having an open conversation about something. So we sort of keep it unscripted and hope that we end up generating knowledge or kind of embodying or, solidifying knowledge as a published piece then on the internet that can be useful to people in the future. But it doesn't necessarily have canonical knowledge. It could be knowledge that has a lot of opinion, or it could have a point of view. We want to hear Minn's point of view. We want to hear Roy's point of view. We don't want to know just what is the answer, because once things are well understood, they can go in Wikipedia, but when they're in that foggy, uncertain area that that's like where all the interesting stuff is, to us. So that's kind of very much in common. But because of that, I think Mishti was getting at this. We have built a lot of tooling with the goal of reusability and creating that library, and that's we haven't. Actually, why don't I just let Mishti can share some of the stuff that we've got coming up. Feel free.
I wish we could show you all this right now. You need to come back and look at this stuff.
What do you mean you wish?
So
we got screen sharing.
You just tell us however often you want us to do it. I mean, we have endless amount of time for our friends.
Wait, DK, do you want to screen share?
Yeah, I do. All right.
That's awesome. Yeah, so we're working on, as DK gets it up, basically live transcripts that can then be searchable. Then also so this is just Figma, but we're working on ways that you can create highlights of video events either as they're happening live or after the fact, and then have the top 10 highlights from a 2-hour event or whatever in this bundle that can be shared on or off platform with the corresponding transcript and any annotation and discussion there. So basically ways on platform of breaking down that dense spread out knowledge into its most important and shareable bits, and then also looping people in with tags or whatever it might be. So maybe you host something and then everyone who showed up at the event or everyone who subscribes to you as a creator gets those 10 highlights in their email the next day or something like that, basically. So a lot of these ideas are very much being built.
I'll bring up
right now. And I mean, how often have you heard about something that happened and just want to hear the highlights of it, and you incidentally run into them? I mean, do you know about Highly? Did we ever talk about Highly?
Oh yeah. I met Andrew.
We were active investors in Highly.
Oh, is that right? Awesome.
We may have been. We weren't there. No. There were other. We were definitely their first institutional investor and owned a bunch and blah blah blah. And love working with those guys. But yeah, that was the dream, is be able to excerpt the most useful stuff of the internet. Now, in their case, text, and in your case, video. But nonetheless, they're pretty powerful.
Yeah, we actually started Highlighter over 3 years ago with the idea that a highlight should be a new atomic unit for information. And we weren't addressing video at all. We were building, initially it was an OCR tool for your mobile phone so that you could take a photo of a page of a book and OCR and use your finger to select a highlight from that physical book and then create these communities around the highlights from the book. So actually and you mentioned Flickster, when I showed that to Joe Greenstein, he was like, you got to meet Andrew. So I connected with Andrew on there. I still follow him on.
I probably connected Joe and Andrew.
What's that?
I think I probably
did. Then let me thank you for the connection. But yeah, I think over time, we still have deep conviction that highlight unit should exist in the world, and that it's a person's perspective on a piece of information, opinion, knowledge. But I think what we've learned is that taking it from kind of the existing book sources is nowhere near as interesting as creating new knowledge together and then creating those clips from the new knowledge that we create together. And so video kind of came about because we were doing a lot of these on Zoom and realizing all the broken problems while trying to make the book thing work. And then we realized actually there's a whole highlighting problem behind this video space too. So let's just kind of dig deep in there. So yeah, just a little bit.
Almost like as we discover the things we imagine making, we keep thinking of new primitives that need to exist.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And that's sometimes what we need. Is we need to anticipate the building block components and then see how they get reused. And I think it's just to me it's such an exciting time because the way in which people want to interact with digital technology, people meaning just humans out there, continues to evolve. I think there's this view in the tech industry that it's all been discovered. But if you ever saw a friend who isn't a techie trying to set up a WhatsApp group, you're like, nah, that's a long way to go. And I just tweeted this yesterday about Bitcoin, that my chess tutor, Bitcoin would definitely be a more convenient, if not necessarily less expensive way to pay them, because they get the money instantly instead of in 2 days, which even in transfer-wise, it takes 1 or 2 days and blah, blah, blah. And still what's that Bitcoin thing? Right. So we have a long way to ride up this familiarity curve as creators because the audiences are still learning how to remix these things.
Yeah. And every time there's new tools that get big, the actual intersection of those tools creates new opportunity.
Well put. Totally well put. Yes.
Makes me enthusiastic for decades more software and internet.
I think there's a lot of good stuff to do. The future is always worth more than the past.
Right. Have you ever, I guess you must have read this Kevin Kelly thing where he talks about kind of imagine people 20 years from now looking back on today and thinking how lucky and easy it was before X, Y, and Z were invented. He's like,
Oh,
yeah, but
man.
back in 2021, it was so easy because it was just standing right out there in front of them, kind of the way we think about domains. We're like, oh, if you could rewind to 1995 and buy
That's
any
right.
domain on
I have
the
not read that, although I do love Kevin Kelly's stuff. What Technology Wants is one of my favorite books. And he and James, talk. And I've just been so impressed with his clarity of thinking and vision and foresight on this stuff. It's just something I've always believed. Although now, again, in my mid-40s, my mentor in his 50s said to me, your personal discount rate is too low. You should be solving for the present more. And that terrified me because I've never thought that way my whole life.
Tell me more about this. What do you mean by a personal
discount rate is the idea from economics of the higher your discount rate is, the less valuable the future is. And the more valuable the present is. It's a concept from the calculation of like net present value and the time value of money. And I've always treated my discount rate as very low. Like I'm going to live a long time, I hope. Mm-hmm. I'd like to, I like of all the things I do well at, the marshmallow test, I'm like fucking amazing at the marshmallow test. But at some point you're like, well, clearly on your deathbed, that's not the right answer.
Right.
And at some point you got to shift that stuff. And the idea that solving for the present might actually be a better thing to do. It's just not how I've thought my whole life. But then as you age, you may want to start thinking that way. I've definitely had people who have rabbit and haired, out-rabbited me many, many times. I've been like, I'm the hare, whatever. I'll figure it out eventually. And that may, like all ways of thinking, I think applying them is a timing and dosage exercise.
Did that shift occur like in a moment, or was it over time as kind of...
No, I mean, the idea crystallized something that I'd been thinking about for a while or wondering in the background about for a while. So it definitely forefronted the question. And then whenever a question gets forefronted, I feel like, you get more of whatever you pay attention to. I started noticing ways that maybe I shouldn't just bet on. I mean, I'll give you one example of a way it changed my behavior is I used to be the kind of person who anybody from anywhere who wanted to build a relationship, I'd try to build a relationship because you just never know. And then you get to the point where your dance card is full and you start realizing some of those people I just don't like the random hitting me up on LinkedIn of seems we run in similar circles. We should be connected. Always the white man with an open for work tab on their thing. And it's I'd rather spend more time with Minn. And so I'd rather spend more time with, Mishti and DK. And so you just have to make choices. And my wife was really important to me also in pointing that out because she's been the whole time I've known her just very intentional in her use of time. Mm-hmm. Whereas I don't think time has math. I could have as many hours in the day as I want. I'll just keep jamming in more shit and figure it out. And so that's been a way that it's evolved for me. And I'm curious how you think about it. Experimenting with projects. This isn't the first project with which you've ever experimented. Sort of how DK, how you hold in your mind the quest, this is the question is, how do you hold in your mind experimenting with something and wishing it to succeed versus at what point do you give up on that thing? There's tradecraft around that. And I'm just curious how you think about it.
Yeah. It's a tough question. I mean, tough in a good way. And I think it's actually surprisingly more personal, which I'm happy to share, but I think it's more personal than objective. Because, when I think with everything we do, when something is new and unproven, there's going to be lots of people who believe in it and lots of people who don't believe in it. Maybe some people who do believe in it. And when to say I continue to believe in it, or I've lost conviction and I've learned enough that tells me no, is so personal because it's what are you seeing every day? What else have you seen that's grabbing your attention and keeping you obsessed? And are there little green shoots of promise that keep you wanting to pursue the original thing that got you excited? And I think, I think, it may be to my fault, or maybe to my, I don't know if it's an Achilles heel or if it's a virtue, but I think I'm sort of missing some gene that is maybe typical in the population where I think I'm probably more patient than most. So I probably err more on the side of giving it too much time instead of, just trying.
Letting it go too long. Yeah. I mean, I'll just say, as all of our qualities are are virtues or Achilles heels, depending on the context. And so it's an Achilles heel until something that you would have thought was stupid in month 34 turns out to be profound in month 37, and you would have given up. And my co-founder of the company that I started, she had this amazing definition of success, which is going to sound so stupid, but because it sounds so obvious, but the more it's obvious, she's like, if every week you feel a little bit better about the thing than you did the week before, you're succeeding. Mm-hmm. And I kind of have thought about that, and it's not strictly true, because if you've invested 2 years in something and you have a few off weeks, but it is your own level of confidence kind of, just not accelerating, but incrementing over time, I think is really powerful. I've got a coach who she is constantly encouraging me to think about incrementing things. So I don't know if you've read The Kaizen Way, the Robert Moore book. It's basically like the psychology of, the book is called like One Small Step to Change Your Life or something like that. It's a terrible title because it just sounds like Who Moved My Cheese. But it is the philosophy, which, Toyota and others have practiced of Kaizen, of just noticing small things and iterating upon them.
Right. I think especially in our collective businesses where, technology can have small changes, which then can compound. And so
totally,
I would look for small changes and wins, but also like, do we have something compounding about this? And I think the biggest, I think, a pessimist could look at, a decade of experimentation without any notable, kind of outcome and say like, that looks like a wasted decade. And I think if you look at like different aspects of what that decade enabled, I think oftentimes you find something compounding, like people relationships, I'd say
sure.
Has been, you could argue I've had a lost decade in my life. I wouldn't argue that, but I think somebody could say that. But I think the people relationships, just far, it's like, that's my greatest success is that
Yeah, there's nothing lost in these things. It's always just a question of what. And I think one of the reasons why technology startups are so hard is that, as we know, the compounding curve before the knee of the curve looks shockingly similar to the non-progressing curve.
Yep.
Which one are you on? That's the tradecraft, is figuring out how to decipher those tiny little cues that tell you you're doing one or the other.
Do you feel like, while not giving people advice, have you found like a lot of disagreement between like your observation of something that somebody's claiming and what they claim or believe? Like, do they say, no, we've totally got it, this is totally working and compounding? You're kind of like,
usually that kind of thing you can. So I have one of my many side projects I would like at some point to do is I would like a format for a structured debate, but where it's not an argument over something, it's a shared attempt to reach a common understanding, a co-bate, if you will. Terrible name.
I like that.
And my feeling about those things is that you can usually get to some factual question about whether there is a fact that actually matters as the thing that compounds. And so usually it's not that, but I find myself often disagreeing with conventional wisdom by just questioning the facts. There were years when a lot of VCs were like, we don't do solo co-founders. And they're like, I don't know, that Amazon thing seemed to work out okay. They're like, well, but that's an outlier. It's like, yeah, the business outliers, come on, don't be stupid. And that's it subjecting yourself and your projects to the scientific method is, I think, the ideal of what I believe we ought to be trying to do. And sometimes you can't. You need faith.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if we pose it to Minn. Minn, do you have any kind of anecdotes or stories around places where you've looked at, talked to founders and been trying to, divine the future and maybe come to a disagreement or a shared understanding based on kind of this notion of discount rates or compounding effects?
With founders, sometimes. I think the honest answer oftentimes, I think, is it depends, right? I think that's also why we're so this is not advice, it is what it is, because we're not saying that there are one right answers to anything, but rather, is there a way that we can share the different variables that you should consider, or the kinds of questions that are worth asking, and the considerations that we might be able to share from our own personal stories. Not to say that like there's a tried and true, this is how you should do things, which, to be fair, I think go viral and make for great blog posts and articles because people want a map. And it's like, I certainly can be privy to that too, where like, yeah, of course, it's like really nice to be able to be told like, this is how, if you follow steps A through G, right, you'll get to Z. But the reality is like so context driven. And for me, at least, I think that element of persistence, right, especially when working with like early stage founders, because in success, they can do probably anything that they want. But there's so few real overnight successes. And I think I have a deeper appreciation from having now worked with Roy and the whole Bloomberg beta team for, I guess a little over 3 years now, that they take a really long time. Founders that I worked with when I started are still working at it, and they're farther along than they were when I was there. But like, Roy, you met Ryan at Flexport like a decade ago at this point.
It was 9 years ago, 8 years ago. And even then, it was clear, that there was something extraordinary there. But that's the tradecraft, is like, I kind of think of the job of an investor at our stage as analogous to an A&R person in the music business, which is like their job is to go to the club and listen to all the people who make the music that they like, and then know that like, okay, even though that still sounds like shit, there's something in it that is a piece that could be built upon, that could be extraordinary. And that's our job too. And then ultimately, what do? They promote the shit out of those people and help them succeed. But it's their talent, they get them resourced and all that. But it's really a lot more like being an agent than it is like being a discriminator, investor, like, I have assessed this and I bet upon you, kind of a thing. I don't know. Or at least that's what I think of it.
I'm curious, like, when you look at other investors, and there's a lot of VCs like publishing a lot and talking a lot on Twitter and whatever, like what qualities in other like agents do you find admirable, or that are you trying to learn from?
Amazing question. Thank you for asking that. And I got to run, unfortunately, in a second because I had a call with somebody. But I have never really thought about that. They're definitely people. So what's coming to mind is who are the people who I admire. And I think the qualities are intellectual honesty. Like that for me is like a bedrock thing, that if I think the person is intellectually dishonest, I just don't know if I can believe what it is that they're saying. And then an accurate self-assessment of their own role in the game. And like, I'll never tell you that like I built a company. I didn't build the fucking company. The founder built the company. That kind of thing. And I'm even careful with words like ours, because like our company or we, because it's like, I don't know, whether I'm part of the we is up to the founder to decide, not up to me to decide. Although I understand it comes from a good place. So intellectual honesty is one. Understanding their place in things, meaning like what they can and can't do, is another. And the third one is people who are just genuinely excited about things that seem to come from their own intentions, as opposed to like, everybody's been talking about the creator economy. Now I'm a creator economy VC. And as the first future of work VC, and when now everybody of future of work, blah, 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 I'm like, especially like eye rolling it, like, oh yeah, sure. Kind of thing. Yeah. So those are some of the things that I really like. And then some of it is just chemistry of like people who I just like their life story. I like what they've had to say. Generally like lacrosse playing Ivy League graduates are just not my thing. But I'm sure I probably have one among my list of friends, but
That's awesome.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I know we're over time, and
I could keep having this conversation. Honestly, I could keep going for hours. So just like more.
We should do another.
Yeah, come back.
We'd be happy to come on your show and share kind of stuff there too. So let's do
it. Let's have both of you as the guests.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Min, will you do me the huge kindness of helping set it up?
Of course. Yeah, we'd love to have you on. That'd be so fun.
Oh, that'd be so fun.
Yes. All right, guys.
Let's do this again. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.